First thing that we're going to do is, if you all don't mind, doing a brief introduction of your name, a little bit of what you did over the summer, and if you have thoughts about what you might do after graduation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt. I went into consulting for Porsche in Atlanta. What I'm going to do, I'm probably going to go back to working for Porsche because it's always what I wanted to. I came to B school to go back into the automotive industry, and specifically actually work for Porsche was kind of like my top goal, and it was kind of satisfying to get that, and I'm happy. And I've been in the US for 9 years, so I've been through the OPT, CPT process 4 times now. So any questions on that, I'm happy to answer.
Great. Hey guys, I'm Karan. I'm from New Delhi, India. I was working with Jefferies. It's an investment bank up in New York. Over the summer, I'm going to go back to their M&A practice full time, and happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Hi guys, Justin Kellaway. Grew up in Canada, but lived in the US 5 years before coming to Owen. I recruited for consulting last year and ended up working with PwC in New York in their financial product consulting practice. And I'm most likely going back, but still to be determined.
Hi guys, my name is Shoaib Rajpai. I was working with Intuitive this summer in the role of Global Marketing MBA intern. It's a med-device company, and highly likely that I'll be going back next year working with them.
Hi everyone, I'm Mai. I was born and raised in Vietnam, and this summer I worked for Mattel as a finance intern, and I haven't decided yet whether I will come back, but I have 4 months to decide.
Just have some time. I should say, one other thing that is in common with this whole group is everybody here is a peer coach. They're all CMC peer coaches. Some of you might recognize them as your peer coach. But yeah, so they're able to be of help on a couple of fronts there. So why don't we start off and just with a pretty general question. These folks are starting to see some of it. How is the experience of doing all this? I mean, a lot of people in your class are looking for internships and doing recruiting. From your perspective, how is it different for an international student, and what do you kind of do with that difference? So, anybody want to start off with that?
Yeah, I can start. I think the thing is you always have to be like upfront. Like you'll have a lot of events where wherever you want to work in, you'll meet a lot of people, and you know, we're all like bright students, and you always get excited about like conversation you can have and opportunities. But sometimes you have to be really just upfront, like, yeah, I'm international, because sometimes you can. It happened to me. I was in contact with a recruiter for a week, and then I found a week later that they just don't hire internationals, right? So I think being upfront with that was something that was very useful to kind of like set the tone and set what you want and what you expect from you.
Just to add to that, I think Brooke would have already drilled this into you, but networking here is very, very important. You won't even get to a first round interview unless you work your way in there. So if you just think that you can drop your resume into the drop-off box and just wait for a callback, most likely it's not going to happen. So network, reach out, go out there, like do coffee chats, just be out there and make yourself available as much as you can. That's really important here.
And if I can also add to that, like one of the offers I've had, not for Porsche, for another company, was through first year, like a peer of mine. So look around, talk to each other. You never know what you can get out of it.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well. I think it's important to maybe cast a little wider net if you're an international student, because you might be let down by certain companies that were on your target list. So I think it's important to be realistic, as well as having some secondary ideas of what you want to do, so you can cast a wider net, because there are a lot of good candidates from this school and other schools, so you just got to make sure that you kind of take enough shots.
I think geography becomes extremely important. I would say focus 80% of your efforts in California, Texas, New York, and Massachusetts, because it's the environment that it's an environment where most of the companies would be willing to sponsor you, a lot of, if not most of them. So we don't get to know about a lot of mid-sized companies in these states who are willing to sponsor international candidates. So that's my words. Yeah.
So for me, companies versus the domestic classmate. On average, what I studied is around we have 20% opportunities versus our domestic classmates. So make sure that you work at least 5 times harder than them. And I just start early and be strategic in what you are doing. So just focus on that.
Follow-up question about being upfront. So does it mean, do you know of any of your colleagues who had companies that were not initially sponsoring but then went out to sponsor them, such that, because sometimes you talk to the recruiters and they go like, okay, we're not so sure, we haven't done it before. Does it mean that you should just let them off your list, or you should?
I think it's true for like smaller companies. They're not sure they want to do it for you, and if you're the right fit, they see like it'll be like a long-term thing, right? So I know, for me, I was selling the point. It's like, hey, I'm doing this internship, and like if I want to do this internship for you guys, like I'm not just looking at the internship. I'm looking at like the future, right? So being upfront with that, and they might sway a little more, right? Especially if it's a smaller company. Usually, bigger companies have certain like things set in stone. So if you're really the one person they were looking for, then it's going to be a little harder. They won't really change their minds. But I think again, being upfront is just telling them, hey, I'm international. Like, how do you recruit international? Just keeping that conversation open. It doesn't have to be a yes or no answer.
It's like getting into Hollywood. Yeah. You can get into Hollywood. There are people who are making movies. They're probably looking for someone to star in that movie. But are you going to place all your eggs in that basket? That's a big question.
Yeah, from my experience, it depends on the size of the company and the infrastructure they have set up as far as immigration. Because a company I worked previously in Houston, for example, they had immigration lawyers who were, contracted out by the company. So if that's the case, generally they're familiar with the process and they're more likely to sponsor. But if they don't have lawyers on staff who are used to doing that kind of thing, then it may be a stretch to get them to do it, or you may have to work with them a little more and try to convince them of the value that you can add in that.
I would just last one. I would add 1 point to that. So I bombed a couple of interviews early on in December and November. Had I not applied to the companies who don't sponsor and prepared my behaviorals, I probably would have gotten 1 or 2 offers more. So instead of writing cover letters for 50 companies who don't sponsor or don't have a policy of sponsoring, better work on your interview and get a strike rate of 1 out of 4.
If there's some other questions, Kelly.
So like the company is coming, like it's gonna be started next week. Like, do you recommend to go to the information session, which doesn't hire international, or is it like just better to prioritize and like focus on like companies hire international?
If you don't feel bad sitting in that information session, and you should do.
I think if it's in an industry you want to work in, it's good to know about the competitors and that kind of thing. If it's in an industry or an area of function that you want to work in, to get to know the competitors and the players in the industry, at least then have a frame of reference for when you do a lot of other companies. I think that's the best way to think about it. Like if you know for a fact that company A doesn't sponsor, but company B is actually your target B company, and they're in the same category, they do kind of the same things. At least give you like a frame of reference of what they do versus what your target company does.
So last year I was in the same boat. Wells Fargo was one of the first banks that had an information session here. They clearly state that they do not sponsor, but I went to that info session. It was useful. After that, there was a happy hour. There were free beers, so why not? Spoke to bankers, but it did help just getting to know what bankers typically ask, how to engage in those conversations, get a sense of what they're trying to get a sense of, so that for the next one I was much better prepared and had already gotten in a rep. So.
Yes, I just want to add on that, like networking is possible for international students. We need to have learning curve, so just kind of keep practice with the kind of non-target companies first, and then when like Amazon or Microsoft coming, you will be more prepared.
I have a question for Justin. It says here job source is job posting. What is job posting? Is it like on GPS or not on GPS?
Mine was kind of interesting. So I applied for PwC through GPS, and they had interviews for Atlanta, and I didn't get selected for that, and then New York called me and asked me to interview, so then I just went and interviewed in New York. So, but they have your resume, so like it was your GPS based.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So we mentioned how to strategically choose companies in terms of their company size, but what about companies that you know sponsor for certain job positions and don't for the other positions? How would you go about that? Would you try to negotiate about the sponsorship?
I think if the company has the infrastructure to sponsor for one type of position, then most likely can be convinced to sponsor for another one. It's more like from my experience, it's more like an infrastructure thing. Like if they have the resources and the lawyers and the HR department and stuff to do that, they'll generally do it or you can convince them to do it. I also had another situation where Emerson was the company, but they said they didn't really advertise that they had kind of advertised they didn't sponsor, but if you're the right candidate, they will sponsor.
I would say that's,
Thank you.
yeah, that's a fair point, and we should always try to understand. But, for example, in healthcare, that is not the case. Because Medtronic will sponsor hundreds of engineers, but they will not sponsor MBAs. So, but a lot of companies have that policy that if you are the right candidate, and they have the system in place.
Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the postings that go up on GPS, for a particular job, they will say very often whether the company is sponsoring or not. So if that says no there, but you know that they sponsor other jobs, I don't think it's a bad thing to just send them a quick note or get on a quick call with someone who's coming to host the info session early on in the process. So the last thing you want is you go through the networking, you go through interviews, and then at the last step right before an offer or something, they tell you, oh, sorry, we just realized that we can't. So as long as there's clear communication from both sides early on, the process should be fine.
And I'll say, kind of for a clarifying point on that, I have seen situations where companies will list on GPS recruiting that they don't sponsor, but if you check, they do. So I would always, if I were you, if it says no, I would double check. I would use the resources that we talked about to check and see if they have a history of sponsoring for the H-1B. I think that can, sometimes that can help, because it's quite possible that one recruiter thinks they don't or doesn't want to worry about it, but they could.
You would get an email from the recruiter who's in touch with school. So I got an email from Davida and Becton Dickinson, both of them. So Becton Dickinson changed the policy in the last moment. So you'll get an email that would you require sponsorship if you apply through Open Portal. So I would say apply everywhere.
Just to clarify that, you apply through GPS.
Yeah.
And then the recruiter will contact you.
Yeah.
Is that typical
If
for every
If
application?
they find you interesting, but they have
Question.
a question regarding your sponsorship.
It's not the norm though. I know no one reached out to me. Maybe Shaw is just special.
A quick. Yes, I just had a twofold question. The first one was, I'm not sure if any of you hedged your bets by wanting to recruit internationally, and if you did, so outside of America, right? So as a Canadian, I'm looking at Toronto too. And so if you did, how did you manage your time and space? And secondly, I'm finding that a lot of people, at least in my group, and not to generalize, but these members of my group are not really focused on recruiting right now, and they don't have to be as much, right? They're very focused on just getting their assignments in. So how did you go about navigating that, right? Given that as a student that requires sponsorship, you have to be a lot more proactive, right? So how did you navigate that with your peers and kind of communicate that, you have a lot more to do outside of just academic work at this point, right? At least in Mod 1.
I can answer it. So as far as recruiting, first part, I guess, recruiting internationally, I found personally it was a little challenging to kind of network outside of that area, but outside of sort of the U.S. because it was just kind of splitting your time. So at one point I just kind of made the decision not to focus on outside of the U.S. because I thought as a Canadian citizen I could just kind of fall back on my citizenship and let that work out later. But it may be different for other countries. I know it's not exactly the same going to Toronto as maybe like
No, but like the timing of the programs though, right? Because they
Yeah.
have MBA hiring too in like Canada, and like the timing's similar to American hiring for
I
sure.
would just say if you have a target company in Canada or a company list, I would just kind of figure out their timelines and just kind of
Try and split it.
yeah. But I don't necessarily think it would be really dependent on that it won't necessarily be easy because they have a lot of feeder systems through their own schools
Local
as well.
schools,
So
yeah.
sometimes it's better just to focus on theirs that have feeders too right now, to be honest with you. As far as group work, I would just say, I mean, you just gotta kind of set the expectations, and there's no real easy way around it other than to try to set the expectations for what you can do and contribute as much as you can. There's no real easy answer to that one.
So some of the companies do post international positions on GPS.
Yeah.
Like J&J, they posted an international job posting on GPS for Brazil and China, so on. So do keep that in mind.
For the group work, I think first you should kind of be direct with your team members that I'm an international student. I need to kind of start early and work hard on that. And the second one is to try to play with your strength. For example, like international student, we are better in statistics or accounting or finance or something like that. So try to kind of put more work on that one, and then they can help you with MOE or communication, right? So that you will be more efficient and effective.
Also, you'll see that after Model 1 things will be a lot
Things will be
easier.
different. Because right now I'm finding
Because
that
right now
all my peers are just like they're treating like undergrad, at least the people in my groups and whatnot, right? But just like academically, whereas my days are packed, right? And so it's just really hard to like communicate that because they're like, oh, you're Canadian though, man, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, you'll be fine and whatnot, but my challenges are going to be equal to everyone else in this room. So
I think that's just going to be the stress of just the dynamics right now of just Mod 1 being in the first year, but you'll see starting Mod 2 there'll be a lot less weight when it comes to like academics, and you'll be able to focus more on your career and what you want to do, because in the end that's what you're here to do. You're not here to get SB or HBs, you're here to get a job, right? And
I mean, that's why I'm here primarily, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for, right?
Let's see.
Thank you.
How often can I be about like, asking if they sponsor me for? Or what is the best way to ask employers, like best way to figure out if they hire internationals or not?
Certainly on the first question, just get to know them, let them know you, and then when you're so the art of networking in US is that you never say anything explicitly. That's the thing, right? The moment you say explicitly, it means you're not prepared. And if you're not prepared, it's just, it doesn't reflect good on your part. So even if you have to talk about sponsorships, you can discuss their policies regarding international students. So have they hire international students from over, or from what schools they hire international students? When does the recruiting cycle starts? So that's how you should go about it. Never ask explicitly.
Should I go to recruiter to get to know recruiter, or should I talk to functional people who might not know about they sponsor visa or not?
I would start with like people who you're gonna work with first, so that like you're in HR or like I'm in finance, you HR you will talk with HR, but I'm gonna talk with finance people first, and then try to kind of at the end of the conversation try to like when you introduce that I introduce that I'm from Vietnam, so they have a sense that I might be international. So then I gotta, because I'm international, so I'm just want to ask whether you know about any international employees at the company, so that if there is, so there's likely that they will sponsor, and then you can go from there.
Also ask second years. If there's a company you want to work for, second years can find out for you. Like I think that's something that I used a lot last year was the second years, just for anything recruiting or even school. Like we're all here, we're very approachable. There's no need to write like, oh, like here, dear Miss Brooks. Right? There's no need for follow-ups. And maybe some people are like that, but the majority of us, it's like, hey, like I saw you at the panel, like have a quick question. We're not gonna ignore you and keep on walking. Like we'll answer your questions. And we've been through this, and we kind of like have a better perspective on the, like the Mod 1 and how much of a pain in the ass it is, but the Mod 2 is like completely different, and how things like evolve throughout the year. So I think that's like the biggest, most direct resource you have. is definitely the second years.
And that's part of the reason that we wanted to do this, is to get you all. Well, and hopefully we'll do some other things later on. You get to hear again from some of these folks and from some other second years as well. But please, that's why I wanted you to have that sheet, is so that you can fill up with these folks and with more, because there's a lot on your thoughts. Let's see, I think you had a question.
I just wanted to know, during your application process, did you ever feel like, compared to the other applicants that were American, you were more discounted because they have to sponsor you?
Not
Or you were
apparently,
considered
no.
less of a candidate because like they would rather pick somebody that was American, it's less work, less paperwork, all that stuff?
Even if it wasn't made obvious to me.
Yeah, same thing.
So the thing is that when you shortlisted for interview, right, you'll see that they usually hire 8 to 10 interns, and I mean the people who make the final cut are 1 or 2, at maximum 3 internationals. So you fight for those 2 or 3 spots, even in the companies who do sponsor, right, among hundreds of international MBAs. So I don't think there's any company out there which hires 8 international MBA candidates out of 8 spots. Right? So it's very evident that you're fighting for 2 or 3 spots.
No, there's definitely a level of frustration though when you feel like you're in a group with your peers and maybe 3 of them get selected to interview and you think you're kind of in that same grouping of people, and that's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's a way of rationalizing to myself why I didn't get interviews for certain things, but it can be a little frustrating at times. But I think that's just provides even more reason why you need to kind of cast your net accordingly to your target companies, but also kind of some secondary companies as well.
Let's see.
So I have a question that would be great if each of you could take a shot at, and then I have a question specifically for you. Like my first question is, how many companies did each of you apply to, and like ballpark, and then something specific about Porsche, like that was your dream company, you were focused on it. Did you have contingency plans? How were you kind of managing that? And at what point did you get a sense that, hey, I'll make it? I think my planning is going through. So like first, but how many companies did all of you guys, each of you apply to?
Around 20.
I networked with about 6 banks.
Okay. Okay.
I put in probably like 50 applications, but probably really worked on like 15 to 20 of those. Some of them are kind of resume dumps.
Okay.
250.
250? 250.
That's the count me and my room partner had. So
Did you
we both
personalize your
almost applied to. So it depends, right? I mean, he was focused on banking, so I was applying to all the healthcare jobs out there. When you apply, don't get the job. You apply. Just put your ego on the floor and crush it. And just apply. And then it's not about do you want that job. It's like a test run. Okay? If you were able to, the best preparation I had for my interview was in the interviews that I bombed in my non-target companies. And that is when because that was the point when I could see the response, the reaction to the answers that I was giving. You might be preparing with your friends, but it's not the same thing.
When did you ramp that up?
Yeah, I mean, you understand what clicked, what did not click, and were you prepared on a certain point of your resume, were you not prepared on a certain point of your resume. Some might want to dig deeper and get into your work experience, and you'll be told all across your preparation that, they won't really go into the process. But I have interviews when people did really dig deep into the process, and I was not prepared. So it's better to be, through that process about 5-6 times before you get into the final interview that you really want. That's my approach.
I applied to 150-ish, but I think the number of applications does depend on like which industry or which kind of position you want. Like investment bankers or consultants, they
versus like me in finance or in kind of healthcare. So, and then you need to discount like when I applied to 150-ish, and then I got interview of around 20, and then I got to a final of around 10. So you can see like how we narrow down the opportunities now.
And to answer your question, I think it was like Shreya was saying, I think it's really important that you get like whatever company it is, just apply to it. I've applied to companies, I might have even applied to like a bank, which I would never work in. But like you do those conversations, you go like, you go meet the HRs, different like employees, and that's just practice, right? It's practice and it makes you understand what you really want, right? And I think when it comes to Porsche, I think it was towards the end of my recruiting. I had an offer from another automotive company, and for me, it was just the culture was there. Like I clicked. I had 4 interviews that just turned into conversations. Like went 30 minutes beyond. Like it was just we clicked. It went well, and that's when I thought like this is a company I want to work for, right? I mean, I've had like one of my worst interviews was with Microsoft, and I totally bombed that. And it was just it felt like I was talking to like a robot that had a list of questions. I had to answer them, and if it wasn't really right, like that's not what the type of company I want to work in. Some people thrive in that. Some people are prepared with that, right? They're prepared to like, mix in the 4 P's of marketing when it comes to something. But that's not how I think. That's not how I see the world, right? And I think when I realized that, first of all, that took a whole weight off my shoulder, knowing that I've seen so many things and I know what I want now, right? And the second thing is just like, the culture was there, and it was just something that I knew it was like a reciprocal like relationship I had with my employer. It was more of a, I'm here to work with you, and I know you're going to help me succeed in your company. So I think it's about that. It's about trying.
So you focused on Porsche through the process, or?
So Porsche, so that happened later. That was like I started like January. So before that, I did like tech recruiting.
Okay.
Right? So that happened January, February. I didn't get my offer till early April. But that was still like, there was still a lot of pushing. Like it wasn't just, I just didn't sit there, right? I just sent emails saying like, hey, had a good talk like 2 weeks ago. If you send me an offer, I'll say yes, right? And it worked, right? So it's a bit of a bold move, but if you think you've had that relationship, if you've had that like conversation with the employer, do it. Take a risk.
And what function were you working with?
So they have a consulting branch, so I was doing IT management consulting for them and the VW group as a whole.
Okay.
Your internship position, is it an actual MBA internship position that's open, or because it says here like friends and family?
Yeah.
So is it an actual MBA internship position?
It is. So I think it's the second time they do it, right? So they usually hire a lot from Germany and then they transfer them, right? So I think, again, back to the coach thing, I'm saying this again, but it's like, so I've lived in Switzerland all my life, like I'm very familiar with their culture and the way they think and everything, and that's what they wanted. They wanted someone who's like understood the American way, but also who understood the very like different German way of doing business, right?
Jane has a question.
So I think my question would be more to you. For a company that has global offices, how do you go about the recruitment process, and how do you ask them to be placed at a location that works for you?
Yeah. Did any of you have any experiences with anything like that?
I applied to a device company in Germany and to a company in Israel. So I applied online, and then I reached out to the recruiter. Usually the official websites, they have someone from HR listed there. So, or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource. I've always used LinkedIn. If you go on LinkedIn, type that company's name, just write recruiter. You'll have a list of 10 recruiters. And if it's a global position, if it's a global company, you shoot an email or a LinkedIn express to that recruiter. And always try with someone who's lowest in the rung. So that if you make a mistake, you can always reach out to someone senior, and that person would not confirm with them. That's how it works. So.
Another thing with global offices is that you have an L1 visa, transfer visa. So like, I know Amazon does this, I know the company I work for does this. It's, if they can get you an H1B or whatever it is, or they don't really sponsor right now, they don't want to put, them as well, they don't want to invest all that money for someone who maybe they're not sure about, they'll send you to, wherever office is, that your passport, you don't need a visa in, and then you spend a year there, and then they transfer you back with an L1, which is just a normal process. It's like, there's no lottery, there's nothing there, it's just, they're a big company, they go to whoever their person responsible is, and you get transferred to the US.
And that's one of the means we've seen some companies where if students go through the H-1B process and don't get it, some companies have done things like that. They'll say, hey, and Microsoft recently did this with an alum, like, hey, you didn't get through the H-1B process, like, here are 2 offices, will one of these work for you? And one did, there for so long, then bring the person back on one visa. I think Richard had a question.
It's a general question though, but what were some of the biggest mistakes you made? I know Shaya, you mentioned earlier on about the behavioral aspects and things like that. What were some of the things you did, you know that you did wrong and maybe we should repeat it? And maybe a follow-up question, would you apply to 150 companies again or 250 companies again if you had a chance to?
I would. The job I got was through Indeed, right?
Yes.
None of the companies that I networked with, I got the job offer. I mean, I got a couple of others, but the one I was really looking for, I couldn't get into Amgen. I couldn't get into Genentech. I probably had a conversation with 30 people in Amgen and 30 people in Genentech. So if you think you're talking to them and you get the intent, it's hit and miss. I did not network with a single person in Intuitive. I applied through Indeed, and I got a call, and I got the internship. But you don't decide the trajectory of your fate, right?
That's deep.
Any other mistakes?
I think if you're doing prep for a certain function, just don't forget about your story and kind of your behavioral issues as well. Especially as an international student, people are going to want to get to know you a little more, and just make sure your story kind of aligns with the role that you're going to be going into. If you're going to a certain, like if you have a lot of interviews, for example, I know myself, I was kind of prepared to tell my story for one function, but some of my backup plans, my story didn't necessarily translate as well because I didn't really have thought through well enough that given area. So just think about that when you're going to interview, that sometimes you're just looking to see if they can build a rapport with you in the behavioral aspect, and it may not be as regimented as you're expecting the question after question. Just be prepared to talk for yourself and have a conversation.
My question's for Justin. I just wanted to know if you actually considered applying to PwC in Toronto.
I did, but I thought about applying to a couple places in Canada. I applied to just, I think it was Bain and BCG in Canada. And I don't think it was a great strategy, honestly. Like if you're coming out of one of the programs, I think they have the target programs in Canada, and I think it's almost easier to see what you can do in the US and then explore those avenues afterwards. But honestly, recruiting in Canada didn't seem to really, it was hard to get contacts essentially. I haven't been there in a while, and the path is easier laid out in front of me. I found here just talking to even second years who work for some of these companies. But if there's, target companies in Canada that don't recruit here, I think that that's something to consider.
Do you have an option to transfer to Canada if you wanted to?
Yeah, I would say so, but I didn't really explore too much because honestly I wanted to kind of get some return on investment.
New USD for sure.
Thanks.
So maybe so we have enough time that you all can come up and ask some questions one-on-one. I think I'll ask one last question to kind of wrap things up. So I'll let you all pick. I'd love to hear from each of you. One, in terms of if you remember where you were last year at this point, just getting into Mod 1, is there anything that you think that they all should be thinking about working on, especially anything that we haven't discussed? And then I guess overall, just another option would be to just any general feedback or input, things that you think are important that just didn't come up yet.
I wouldn't worry too much about networking that thing so far. I'm just trying to get your feet set and what companies you want to apply for and figure out the area and function, and just kind of keep up with what's going on in the CMC and the events that come on campus. And like we said, attend even if you don't know if they sponsor, maybe attend the event just to get a frame of reference and say, and just kind of figure out where you want to go. I would just say that's like the number one thing for Mod 1, and then you can kind of start fine-tuning your story and your applications and your networking and stuff in Mod 2 and building up to, unless you're doing investment banking, but coming into the new year. So yeah, that's what I would say. Just kind of stay on track with the CMC and those kind of things.
Anybody else?
For me, I think you should take advantage of the second year. I think for me, like besides CMC, the second year helped me a lot last year. So try to reach out to them. They were in your shoes like last year. So take advantage of them. And the second thing is about networking. I think you should take it seriously, but don't expect too much from it. It doesn't work like you call someone and they're gonna refer you or give you an interview tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. But like it's gonna be a way for you to kind of learn more about the companies, and then if you get an interview, people will maybe know about you because they might talk to each other. So save the start. Don't expect too much, but take it seriously.
I would say don't delay the behavioral. It's very important. And there are, almost 150 questions in behavioral, and there's no end to it. There's no end to it. And now they ask the second story, third story. So even if you have a story prepared, you want to know another story. So, I mean, Amazon, people who want to go to Amazon, it's hell out there.
So Brooke, will we ever get, I know it's not cast in stone, but would we ever get like a document, like soft template of behavioral questions? Because some of us have never seen like the typical behavioral questions, right?
Yeah.
Will we ever get
Just
something
questions,
like that?
right? Like, yeah.
So there's a couple resources that'll help you. So one thing, you all probably remember last year we had an interview feedback database. We're in the midst of migrating that to a new system, the VEST system, where you all entered your internship data. So that's in, hopefully within the next week or two, that should be up. So then you could go in and you could put in any companies that a lot of these folks interned with, and see like what are some of the typical interview questions. Like, and usually most people fill it out with a couple of questions they got during that interview. So that's one way.
That's awesome.
But if you want more general, I can point you to some other resources as well. But that resources will be one of the best.
Looking forward to this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just to answer your question, when I was in your shoes last year, it was still pretty early on. I was grappling with Mod 1, but what's important is trying to figure out 2 or 3 industries that you want to target, and then talk to people, talk to CMC, talk to Brooke, but also talk to people who recruit in those industries, so you know exactly when you need to have what ready. Don't if you realize that you want to do banking in January, then it's already too late for you. It's almost impossible to do it. But and there are 2 or 3 industries, job functions that recruit early. HOP, marketing, banking. These are some of the really early ones. So you need to just know whether you're targeting one of these or no. If you're not, you still have time. Talk to someone. They'll be like, don't worry, buy it till October. Don't even bother me with mock interviews requests till October. But if you're doing banking or HOP or something like that, marketing, you need to be ready for National Black or some of these things, and people will tell you that listen, this is it. This is go time. Get ready. So it's important when to like be prepared and when to start pushing really hard. It's no point if you have to recruit in February, no point like just going crazy right now. So that balance is important.
So that's usually tech. Tech will be like
correct.
later. They'll do a lot of just in time. We had a friend of mine interviewed for Google in May. So like, and they said he would have an interview in, I think it was March. It took them 3 months to get it together. So like, tech is completely different from, like you were saying, I think HOP, like when we had Microsoft come speak for marketing, like that day is when HOP had their applications due for Microsoft. So like HOP is like, I think the earliest one. There's a couple of good people in our class that are really good at it. And if you need anything, contact any of us. You know, Brenda's and stuff like that. And for consulting and banking, I think your grades also matter a lot.
Yeah.
Right, so focus on that on Mod 1. I know I was saying it doesn't really mean a lot, but if you're doing for those 2, it does mean a lot. So try and find like that good balance between getting good grades and then applying to those companies.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Please give me a hand.